Hey everyone, it's Scott Rustrolds here on June 6th for today's edition of the Listen and Learn podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in, and just another quick reminder up front to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can be alerted every time we release our video daily, and as well as please share the podcast with any friends or family whom you think might be interested in the analysis we offer every night. So with that, a couple main stories I want to focus on today. First, substantively, I had another headline on how the Obamacare individual exchanges are in total collapse. Well, today, Anthem says that they're going to be exiting the state of Ohio, may exit further states in the future, but what makes this a big deal is there are now 20 states, and you can see it in this map, 20 counties, excuse me, not 20 states, 20 counties in Ohio that will have zero insurers next year. There are probably going to end up being over 1,200 counties nationwide that have zero or one insurer. So again, you just have this creeping single payer system essentially where there's no choice for consumers, which just raises costs and is not giving consumers the options we were promised when the law was passed. And it's just another sign of how the law is failing. And you have to ask yourself, Obamacare includes an individual mandate, right, where you have to buy insurance. Well, how can you fulfill the individual mandate if there's no insurance even being offered in your county? And this law is in crisis. And that's why it's really good news today that the Senate looks like it will be could potentially be nearing a deal to pass a Obamacare replacement. So the House, if you remember a couple weeks ago, passed the American Health Care Act, which has moved over to the Senate, where passage has seemed pretty uncertain. But it looks like some serious progress has been made, and a good rule in Washington is to not bet against Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who can do a tremendous job of forming together coalitions. And it looks like they're getting close to some kind of an agreement, with perhaps parts of the bill being sent to the CBO to be scored this week because it has to cut the deficit. And then that could set you up for a vote perhaps by July 4th. Though I still think passage is uncertain, it does seem like we're closer than we ever have been. Just want to remind you with this chart of the key senators to watch. And again, you have these three kind of coalitions, and this is the challenge McConnell faces, where he needs to appeal to both the moderates and move the bill a little bit their way, keep the center-right coalition, which wants to expand Medicaid, which comes from states that expanded Medicaid and wants to keep some of that expansion. But at the same time, you need to hold on to your conservative wing, the Rand Pauls and Mike Lee of the world. And getting a trade-off amongst all three parties is challenging. And you can only lose 2 votes and then have Mike Pence come in and be the tiebreaker. And if you get that deal, it then goes back to the House, which presumably I would expect would pass it. So that's kind of the balancing act McConnell has. He only has 2 votes to spare. On this list, I would say Collins amongst the moderates is probably the most difficult. And Rand Paul is another one who, if the bill moves too far away from the House version, may become a bit more reluctant to support it. My end guess is that the House bill cut the deficit by about $100 billion by cutting taxes, $850 billion, and spending $950 billion. My guess is that they will keep the expanded Medicaid a bit longer than the House did, make the tax subsidies for buying insurance for those over the age of 45 a little bit more generous than the House did. And as a consequence, the Senate bill will probably only save, call it $600 billion. So you're going to have to postpone some of the tax cuts and tax repeals that were included in the House bill. So you probably will cut taxes by $500 billion, which is still a massive tax cut that should help the economy. And overall, you still continue to cut the budget by a deficit by $100 billion over a decade. So the House and Senate are making progress, which is good news, is underlined again by what's going on with Anthem pulling out of more markets. With that, move on to another big story, which is Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General. You're having some reports out of ABC that he and the president's relationship has soured. Sessions perhaps even offered a resignation if the president had lost confidence in him. As with all things anonymously sourced in the media, I take everything with a grain of salt, but I just want to make very clear that we have to hope the relationship has not deteriorated to this degree, and that a Sessions resignation or firing would be a massive setback for the administration and can't happen. Sessions is a good man who was an early Trump supporter. In many ways, was one of the intellectual founders of the more populist conservatism that carried Trump to the White House. It would be a massive mistake to let him go. He's got the right, tough on crime, tough on drugs, tough on immigration policies that the base wants and that Trump campaigned on. Moreover, the real disagreement was Jeff Sessions recusing himself from the Russia investigation, given his role on the campaign. And while you can argue either way whether or not Sessions should have done this, there's no clear linkage of him to Russia, which would argue that he shouldn't have recused himself. But on the other hand, given that he was close in the campaign and it's important that the public feel confident in the outcome of the investigation, you can see why you would recuse yourself. Wherever you come down on that, the key point is once you've recused yourself, you can't unrecuse yourself. So even if the president is bothered by the fact that Sessions recused himself and that's led to some of the special counsel with Bob Mueller and so on and so forth, we have to move on. The past is in the past. This has happened. And with Comey coming to testify on Thursday, the fact is the administration needs stability. The last thing it needs is an attorney general leaving 5 months into the job who is the most ardent Trump supporter, causing another massive distraction at the same time that you're going to have every network airing the Comey testimony all day live in hope that it will damage the president politically, even though it appears that Comey is going to say that Trump did not violate any laws, which, as we've discussed in the past, has been pretty evident. But this is the last thing, really, that the administration would need. I would hope that these stories are very much exaggerated, but would just caution anyone in the administration who thinks this is a good idea that this would be disastrous. The president needs to express his confidence in Jeff Sessions, and let's move on. And in honor of Jeff Sessions, final kind of step back picture of the day I think is kind of interesting, given some of the discussion you're seeing domestically and in Europe about immigration, that immigration has kind of stepped onto a bit of a back burner, but it's still an important issue that we need to have a real fruitful debate on as a country. What is the right level of legal immigration? And this is completely separate from the illegal immigration. And that's where I think a couple charts are interesting. First, just to set the stage, it's worth noting that we have more immigrants per capita than any time since 1920, which may surprise you, as you can see in this chart, and it's the orange line. So for all the talk about the anti-immigrant tone the country's taken, there are more immigrants per capita than we've had at any time since World War II. And there's been a massive surge over the past 40 years. It's quintupled the number of immigrants per capita since 1970. The number of immigrants has more than doubled since 1990, from less than 20 million to nearly 45 million. So this is a massive spike in immigration that's really unprecedented in the past 100 years, and you have to go back into the 1800s to see something like that. So I think as you step back and think first about the immigration argument, this is important to remember that we have more immigrants than ever, and you keep in mind that you've seen a massive slowing in median household income, where household income is lower today than it was in 2000, and you're bringing in all these immigrants. Is that right for the average American? And we need to, when we set an immigration policy, ensure that we're doing so in a way that it is accretive to the average American and not downwardly pressuring their wages, which is why I think this chart is interesting, because what you always hear is that immigrants are far more productive and boost economic growth without dispute. And I think there's some argument to be made that there's a little bit of a dispute, particularly when you're adding the number of immigrants as quickly as we have in the past 25 years. And that's if you look, we're actually seeing productivity now is at an all-time low, the same time that our immigration share of as a country is hitting an all-time high. So we've reverted, obviously, in the orange, the immigrants as a percentage of the population, but you actually found over the past 60 years, there's been a negative correlation of 0.5, statistically significant, negative correlation between the number of immigrants in the country and the productivity growth of the country, which makes one wonder if we're being discerning enough in terms of how we decide what immigrants to bring in, and whether or not we're checking to ensure that it's helping the average American the way it should. Because at the end of the day, all of our policies, immigration, national security, economic, should be about ensuring that it's putting citizens first. And what you saw with Trump was a revolution of voters, and essentially what I would call it is we've been screwed over, and now we're hammering back. And I think this broader discussion on legal immigration fits into that, and it's something we need to elevate further and discuss. What is the appropriate level of immigration? At a certain point, does massive legal immigration actually become deleterious to the pace of economic growth? So this is a kind of a big picture topic that Jeff Sessions brought to the forefront years ago, and I think is going to continue to be in the forefront probably for the next couple of decades until we get a better answer on this. So as always, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.